Folks, this month is a big deal. It's the 25th anniversary of Persona, and if you've been following us all month long, then you're probably getting sick of me saying that by now. Yes, this month has been Persona month for the channel, as I've been making videos celebrating the series all month long because, as I have said over and over, Persona is my favorite video game franchise. Yes, I know, I'm admitting that I like something on the internet. What can I say? I like to live dangerously, folks. However, despite me saying that so many times, I haven't yet gone over why I love this franchise. So, to end Persona month, I wanted to do something special. I wanted to cover my history with this franchise and really break down what it is about this series that I love so much. Because I'd be willing to bet that there's a lot of people out there who have never played Persona, and they're probably wondering why this series is so popular. Why do so many people love it? But if they've ever tried to ask that question online, they've probably been treated to a barrage of...
Every day's great and you're too next.
Cake or pie?
I've been waiting for this. Delicious pancakes.
Where are you touching? Get stuff.
Yeah. This happens with a lot of franchises once they reach a certain level of popularity. We're trying to break into the fan base is basically just wafting through a lot of memes and out-of-context jokes rather than gain actual information. So that's why today I wanted to try something a bit different for us. And I want to really delve into the positives of the series, why it appeals to so many people, and even get a little bit personal with why the series means so much to me. But let's start with the question that a lot of you might have. What exactly is Persona? Well, it's a Japanese role-playing game, and much like other long-running series within the genre, like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, each installment stars a brand new cast of characters in a brand new location. However, there are a few key ideas that connect each of these games. They're always set in the real world and focus on a group of young characters who find a secret world made up of human thoughts and desires given form. In these worlds, the heroes are able to bring out their personas, creatures that are meant to be essentially your inner self given form. From there, the game is pretty much going their own directions, aside from a few recurring plot points, such as you receiving your persona powers from a mystery man in a dreamlike realm called the Velvet Room, and each game having good, bad, and sometimes even true endings based on whether or not you make the right choices. Now, in terms of plot, that's where the similarities end, but in terms of themes, these connections run much deeper. Persona is a series that isn't afraid to tackle heavier topics, such as political, social, and psychological issues. And while many other RPGs can address these issues as well, because the franchise is set within the real world, it can be far more upfront with these subjects, causing these topics to hit a lot closer to home for many audiences. However, I said those are the similar themes that run between the games, but themes are different from tones. And one of the most impressive things about this franchise is just how much these games change from one installment to the next in terms of plot, music, and presentation, and yet it manages to nail whatever it's going for every single time. Whatever aesthetic it's trying to achieve, it always pulls it off, even if it's completely different from the last game, and the music is always incredible. These are some of my absolute favorite soundtracks in video game history, and they're all different from each other. For example, Persona 5 is a sleek and stylish heist crime thriller with a jazzy score and bright red color patterns. Persona 4 is an upbeat Scooby-Doo style mystery with a poppy soundtrack and bright yellow design, and Persona 3 uses dark blues and a hip-hop theme while being almost a horror game. It feels like the RPG Junji Ito would make. And it was actually this third installment that I and a lot of other modern-day Persona fans started with. It was around this time that I was actually starting to fall out of love with RPGs. Back in high school, that was actually one of my favorite genres, but in my final few years of college, I was throwing myself into my studies, so I didn't have time for big 100-hour-long adventures. But after graduating and going into the workforce, I was finding myself, let's say, a little overwhelmed and really in need of some escapism. So I went to a game store to try and find something to lose myself in, only to then remember, oh right, I'm broke. But a friend of mine had recommended Persona 3 to me a few years ago, and now the game had dropped down to around $20, so I decided to take a chance. And before I even got to the first dungeon, something about this game just clicked with me. You see, another reason that I had been falling off the RPG train was because I just wasn't really that interested in fantasy settings anymore. Far-off, magical, mythical lands just wasn't really doing it for me. I was beginning to enjoy stuff that was set in more of a realistic world. And as dumb as this sounds, the moment I saw a character in this game pull out an MP3 player and another character using a cell phone, I actually stopped and said, oh, that's new. I haven't seen that before. Yeah, I know that sounds dumb, but that was actually kind of a rare thing for RPGs back in the days. So as soon as I saw it, I kind of just stopped and had to marvel at a little bit. And as I fell out of love with RPGs, my love for horror games had begun to grow. When I was a kid, I was a big scaredy cat and got freaked out just from seeing a commercial for Resident Evil. But as an adult, I started to see the fun in getting spooked. I started to enjoy games that sent chills down my spine. And this was the first time that I had ever seen an RPG lean so heavily into the horror genre. From the plot revolving around a secret hour at midnight where monsters came out, to creatures made up of sprawling, wiggling body parts, to the macabre set pieces and twisted imagery, it just infused this game with this niche brand of J-horror that was still very rare to American audiences at the time, and I ate that up. And all of this was before I even got to the actual gameplay, which is maybe one of the most genius things about the Persona franchise. Persona feels like a game that is trying to be about 4 or 5 different genres all at once. It feels like someone in the kitchen saying, well, this tastes good, and this tastes good, and these other things all taste good. So let's just put them in a big bowl and obviously it'll come out great, right? But that's not how you cook a delicious meal, that's how you end up with food poisoning. You can't just put a bunch of random ideas into your game and assume that they're going to gel together. Yet, somehow, the Persona games are able to pull this off. And if I had to say why this works, it's because of the loop. And anybody who has played a Persona game knows what I'm talking about. In each Persona game, you'll run through dungeons filled with monsters until you get to the end and fight the boss. Okay, that's pretty standard stuff for an RPG. And you'll fight these monsters off with your Persona, but along the way, you'll collect other Personas to add to your collection. Then you can take these Personas back to the Velvet Room where you can fuse them together to make stronger Personas. However, every Persona belongs to 21 different categories, each named after one of the major arcana of the tarot cards. So the Fool, the Magician, the Chariot, and so on. Now, when you leave the dungeon and you return to the real world, you'll have to live your daily life. You'll go to school, play sports, go to work, and in doing all this, you'll meet other characters. And those characters will be linked to these 21 different arcana. These are known as your social links, or confidants in Persona 5. And as you play through the game, each day that passes, you'll be able to hang out with these characters, and when you do, you'll level up your social link. Meaning now, when you fuse a Persona together of the same arcana, they'll get more experience points, making you stronger when you go back into the dungeons. However, you can't just walk up to someone and say, hey, let's be friends. No, some people have a thick outer shell that you have to break through first. You see, you also have social stats, things like intelligence, charm, kindness, and some people will only want to hang out with you if your stats are high enough. So how do you increase those stats? Lots of ways. You can study, you can read books, you can go out to clubs, you can go fishing, work jobs. There are so many things that you can do to raise each of these stats. But here's where the genius lies in all this. This game works around a daily schedule. You can do something in the afternoon and you can do something at night with different options being available to you at each of these times. And as I said, you have to fight your way through dungeons. But you have to make sure that you've made it through a dungeon by a certain point. And this is when the loop comes into play. Okay, today I went out to the dungeon, beat a lot of monsters, made a lot of progress, good job team, let's go home. Next day, you can go and hang out with this social link. Then that night, you stay home and you study. And because of that, your intelligence went up, so that means that you can now talk to this brand new character the next day. Oh, but they're not available on that next day. But that's okay, because this other character is available and you need to rank up their social link. And because you talked to them, now they showed you this brand new location with brand new activities that you can do there. So now, the next day, you can talk to that person that you wanted to talk to 2 days ago, and they introduce you to a brand new person, and that's another social link, but only after you've talked to them a certain number of times, so that's going to take a couple more days in order for you to do that. But before you can do that, you do need to raise up your intelligence. So that means that you need to go out and work at this part-time job. And by working at that part-time job, not only have you increased your stats, but you've also earned money, and you can now use that money to buy armor, which will make you tougher when you go back into the dungeon, which you really need to do because the due date to complete that dungeon is coming up. But hey, would you look at that, because of all the things that you did in between the last time that you went to the dungeon, your persona is stronger, meaning that now you can get further. Okay, I know that sounded crazy, but that's the headspace these games put you in. Persona at its core is a time management game. which is maybe the most boring way that I could describe it, but hear me out. What you don't understand until you get into this game is how insanely addictive this loop is. How each of these events feeding into each other and knowing that every single thing that you do adds to something else that then makes it so that you can do additional things in the game, and how all of that ends up moving the story and the game ahead makes this one of the most just one more type of games I have ever played. I have said multiple times playing a Persona game, okay, I'm done for now. Maybe I'll just hang out with this person first. And then maybe I'll go and study and see if that raises a stat. And maybe I'll fuse a few more personas together. And now that I've fused those personas together, I should really take them into the dungeon and try them out. And then it's 5 hours later. I will admit it takes a little while before you get to this point. The loop just doesn't begin as soon as the game starts up. No, you really do have to get that ball rolling, and the Persona games are notorious for taking a long time to get going, and I will gladly admit that critique is totally fair. But once you get into it, once you start opening up new social links and new locations and new jobs, it just becomes this snowball that just rolls on its own, getting bigger and bigger. There is a madness behind how all of this is designed, and it's not until you get dozens of hours into this game that you can just look at it and realize, oh, this is brilliant. Also, I'm trapped in this game now and I can't leave. But that's all the stuff outside the dungeon. When you're actually fighting monsters, the game takes on the classic RPG turn-based combat, and around the PlayStation 2 era, most games were moving away from that. They looked at it as an outdated mechanic, and I can understand that. I mean, it is a lot slower, it isn't as flashy, but honestly, I kind of enjoy turn-based combat. I think there's a level of strategy to it, and I find that engaging. When you have to map out your turns and think about who should do what at what time, it gets my brain fired up. And I think that might actually be another reason why I was starting to fall out of love with RPGs. RPGs just didn't want to do that anymore. I remember when Final Fantasy XII came out and they decided to just stop doing turn-based combat, I looked at that and went, oh, so this is just happening now. The thing that I like is gone, and it's probably never going to come back. Well, that's disappointing. But Persona didn't move away from turn-based combat. No, they realized that the appeal of it was the strategy element. So instead, they decided to lean into that. You see, in Persona, every enemy has a weakness, and if you hit the opponent with that weakness, then they get knocked down, and you get to attack again. And if you manage to knock down all of your opponents, then you get to perform a devastating all-out attack. So, within these fights, you have to figure out how to knock down each of your enemies with the characters you have before the enemy's turn. And with each installment, the game added more layers to this idea. You can level up your party members so that if they knock down an enemy, then they can also heal one of your teammates from a status effect. Or if you fail to knock down an enemy, then you get a chance for your teammate to come in and do it for you. And then in Persona 5, they implemented a baton pass mechanic, where if you knock down an enemy, then you can just hand your turn off to your teammates. So if you can only knock down one enemy, but you know you have a teammate who has an attack that will knock down another one, then you can just pass your turn on to them. Again, Atlus realized that when it came to turn-based combat, the big appeal of it was the strategy element. So they tinkered with it until eventually you got something that was one part game of chess and one part a collectible card game where you just try and combo together as many moves as you can. The Persona series isn't just keeping turn-based combat alive, they're making it better than it's ever been. So when it comes to the gameplay, Persona is engaging and addictive. Whether you're in combat or just going through your daily routine, it will keep you thinking and mapping out what to do with every decision in a way that makes you want to keep playing hour after hour, day after day. But gameplay only goes so far, and as good as it is, that's not the big appeal of the series to me. No, when I picked up the third game, I was won over by the tone and the combat, and when the daily loop started to really build, it kept digging its claws deeper and deeper into me. But if you ask me what's the strongest point of the Persona series, it is and always has been the characters. In most RPGs, you need a really strong cast to keep you going. I mean, if I'm going to play a game for hundreds of hours, I want to spend it in good company. And part of the brilliance of Persona is that it forces you to get invested with these characters, because that's literally a game mechanic. I mentioned earlier with the social links, if you hang out with a character, then the link goes up and that gives you access to stronger personas or other buffs. But you don't just stand next to them and it tells you, hey, you leveled up. No, each character has a story, and increasing your social link means progressing that story. And the thing about Persona is, this series does not pull its punches. And that's why I love it. I'll be honest with you guys, I've been trying to think of how to address this, how to really explain what I mean by this, but in the end, I kind of have to be blunt about it. Persona is the RPG about depression. Okay, I know there's a lot to unpack in that statement, but essentially, Persona is a series that isn't afraid to turn to the audience and say, hey, sometimes life sucks, and there's nothing that you can do about that. Which, in a genre of games where so often the big villain can be defeated through the power of friendship and everyone gets everything that they want in the end, it's kind of shocking how much this game isn't afraid to have stories where things just fall apart on you. For example, one of your social links in Persona 3 is with a friend on the track team. He's energetic, he's dedicated, and he swears that he's going to be the best one day. So you start your social link thinking, okay, I'll have some kind of a friendly rivalry against them and we're going to compete against each other. But then you get to the second day of your social link and he says, oh, wait, hold up, my knee hurts. And needless to say, things go downhill from there. His knee gets worse, he starts to see his dreams slipping away, he can no longer compete, and while his story does end on a good note, everything isn't magically fixed. And that's what I love about the characters and their stories in Persona. Most of the time, a character's story will have a positive end, but that end never undoes all the bad. And I find that to be so much more motivating. I appreciate stories that aren't afraid to say, hey, life is hard, and sometimes you can't really fix that. For example, in Persona 3, there's a character who's sick, and he wants to finish this children's book that he's been working on before he dies. And he does. He manages to finish the book, and that is motivating. But they don't turn around and say, hey, and guess what? He also managed to beat his disease and he's gonna make it. No, that's not the kind of stories these games tell. Or in Persona 4, you meet this young girl in your drama club, and she's going to go on to be the big star in the school play, and she's putting everything that she has into it. But then her dad, who abandoned her as a child, returns out of nowhere, and it turns out he's dying and she wants nothing to do with him. But it's still her dad. So on some level, she does want to spend some time with him. She can't remember that that's her dad. She does on some level still care about him. But she also hates him. And she has no idea how she's supposed to feel. And that's something that the Persona series isn't afraid to do with their characters. They're willing to come in here and say, sometimes things are just bad. And your brain might tell you that you should feel one way, but we're all humans. We don't work like that. Sometimes you just have to live through something awful, and you're going to feel terrible about, and there's no magical speech that's going to fix everything, and the only way that your friends can help you is just to be there for you in your time of need. And this extends to the playable characters themselves. Most of the characters give birth to their personas by going through some personal breaking point or facing their inner demons. And throughout the franchise, we've seen that range from the extreme to the subtle. In Persona 5, the creators had a mission statement that they wanted this game to tackle the biggest issues that they saw around them in the world, going so far that the big villain of the game is a corrupt predator running for prime minister. And I'm not going to go into too many details about this because, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but also because this is the kind of stuff that could really hit too close to home for some people, and I don't exactly know if I'm the best person to cover such serious topics. But all of your party members are people who have suffered at the hands of corrupt figures in society. Your teammates are people who suffered physical abuse, psychological manipulation. Heck, one of the first party members that you get is a woman who is being sexually assaulted by her teacher, and the entire school doesn't believe her and says it's her own fault. And you see how this weighs on her. It's about to make her break from all this. Again, I know that I am not the best person to go into any real depth on this topic, but this was one of the only times in a video game I had ever seen such a serious issue being addressed in such a real way. And this next one kind of hits home for me, but later on in the game, you get a party member who suffers from anxiety. And speaking as someone who has multiple friends who suffer from clinical anxiety, this is one of the first times in a game or a movie or a book or anything where I saw this condition being represented so well. There were so many moments with this character just in how she stood, how she talked, how she couldn't make eye contact. It was all so real. And in the game, your team uses their personas to help her, but they don't just use their big magic personal genies to snap their fingers and there, you no longer have anxiety. She still suffers from it throughout the rest of the game and has to keep dealing with it. There's even a moment in the story where she thinks, aha, we used our personas and now I'm magically over all my issues. I can go out and be just like everyone else. Only for her to go to the mall and immediately have a panic attack because of all the people there. And I love that this game about kids with magical powers just stops to turn to the audience and say, no, this is a very serious thing, and there is no magic switch that you can just turn to get through it. But it still shows her working over the course of the game to face this issue and working hard to try and overcome it. And I find that to be so motivating. Yes, this is a franchise where people still face down apocalyptic gods, but the fact that it can also tackle such serious, real issues that people go through, and it can show them actually working through it and not trying to play down or pretend like it never existed, I find that far more uplifting than all the big superheroics of the Persona gameplay. And I just love that the issues these characters can go through can be so personal, they can be so real to the point where it'll tackle topics that other games would usually ignore. One of the most impressive examples of this to me is Kanji in Persona 4. In that game, the characters have to face down their inner dark secrets, and Kanji, this big badass who beats up biker gangs, his inner secret is that he doesn't know what his sexuality is. He's struggling to figure that out. I can't believe that a massive RPG dedicated a good chunk of its game time to a teenager struggling with this issue, which is something that I think a lot of people struggle with when they're at that point in their life. And again, this is one of those topics that you could dedicate an entire video to, and believe me, there are a lot of them out there. But I've seen some people criticize Kanji's story because by the end of the game, you don't know the answer to what his sexuality is. They keep it vague all the way up until the very end. But I actually view that as a strength of this story because, again, I said that I love how real these topics can be, and to me, I look at Kanji and view his story as the game saying, hey, sometimes you're not going to figure this out overnight, and that's okay. And I think the reason why so many people out there aren't satisfied with that answer is because most stories wouldn't be willing to do that. Most stories would say it has to be one thing or the other, but that's not always how real life works, and that's okay. I'm sure this wasn't on purpose. I'm sure that the creators didn't think this far into it, and God knows the issue isn't always handled perfectly in this game. But sometimes a story can have a message that goes beyond the creator's intent. And I think that Kanji, still trying to figure this stuff out by the end of the game, makes him a much more human character that a lot of people will be able to connect with. Because again, some people out there need time to think about this. Some people are unsure about this stuff. And when I look at Kanji, it's this game saying, that's okay. Again, I could keep going into deeper and deeper details about each of these characters and their stories, but we don't have time for that and I don't want to spoil them all for everyone. But I love that I could do that. Each of these characters are detailed and complex enough that you could spend a whole day dissecting each of them. And speaking of Kanji and Persona 4, I said Persona 3 was my first game in the series, but Persona 4 was my favorite. And simply because that game felt so real and it came to me at the exact time that I needed it. I mentioned that I picked up Persona 3 because I was kind of in a rough spot in my life and I needed some escapism. Well, months went by and let's just say things didn't get much better for me. I had graduated from college and tried to move off to the big city and things didn't go well, so I had to go back home to the country where I got a new job and it was just beating me down every single day. So then I got my hands on a copy of Persona 4 and the game was all about a guy who moved from the big city out to the country. Okay, already I'm invested. And then it gives you a cast of characters who, listen, I love the cast of the other Persona games, they're all great, But Persona 4's cast is just delightful, and they feel so real. The way these characters bounce off of each other, I look at that and go, yeah, of course that's how a handful of small-town kids would behave. And then these characters have to go into this mental world, and the way that they awaken their personas is by facing their shadows, which are just the dark inner thoughts that you keep inside of yourself that you try to ignore. So, what dark thoughts did our heroes have? What were they trying to hide? Did they secretly kill someone? Did they burn down an orphanage? Did they cheat on their taxes? No, the dark secrets they have inside is, I hate living here. I hate myself, and I enjoy having my popular friend depend on me because it makes me feel important. Yeah, it wasn't anything huge, but it was real. The issues these characters were dealing with were the types of things that anyone out there might feel, and they're the type of things that anyone out there would feel bad about. But as I said, they weren't huge, so they're not the kind of things that a normal story would try to address. Most other games would view issues like this as being too small and not worth addressing in a big dynamic RPG. But I found it so refreshing for a game to come in here and go, yeah, a lot of people have these kinds of thoughts, and they feel bad about these kinds of thoughts. But we all go through that. It doesn't make you a bad person for feeling like this, and you can face these issues, and you can work through them. And even though I'm only really talking about Persona 3 through 5, simply because that's when the gameplay finally found its footing, when it comes to the characters, these heavier issues have always been a part of the series. Time for some slight spoilers about the original games, but in Persona 1, you go into an alternate world where everything is falling apart, only to find out that this world is actually being created by one of your friends, one of your own party members. She's been stuck in a hospital bed all this time with deteriorating health, and she created this world because she just needed an escape. She wanted to get away from her life. And when she realized she's the one responsible for this horrible world that they're all trapped in, she can't deal with it. But the big message that her friends have for her isn't, it's okay because we know that you're not really to blame here. There's actually some big monster that we have to go and fight together. No, the message they have for her is, yes, you hate your situation. And that's okay. Your situation sucks, and sometimes life sucks. But that doesn't make you a bad person for hating this bad situation. That's actually a really mature message. And when it comes to Persona 2, listen, that story is a whole can of worms that I won't attempt to unpack here, but the Persona 2 sequel, Eternal Punishment, shows characters suffering through several very realistic problems. And towards the end of that game, the one teenage member of your party turns to all the adults on your team and asks them, do things get better when you get older? And everyone just sort of falls silent because, hoo boy, that is a tough question. And I know some people will look at that and go, that is not the thing you should say to a kid who is suffering through a mental crisis right now. And hey, I understand. I cannot stress enough, this is not a franchise for everyone. But I honestly think some people out there feel better when you don't just tell them, oh, everything is going to be fine, but instead when you tell them, hey, I know things suck for you. We can all relate to that. And even if that's not the sort of thing that you should tell a teenager while they're going through rough times, again, the cast of Persona 2 Eternal Punishment is mostly adults. And speaking as adults, yeah, it feels kind of refreshing to see a group of adults all admit, nah man, things still kind of suck. But hey, we're all still going. We're all still here. We're all still fighting. To me, that is far more encouraging than just pretending like everything's gonna be okay. And speaking of that, as I said, I played Persona 4 shortly after I got out of school, when I couldn't make it in the big city and had to move back to the country and had to take a soul-crushing job, and I just hated all of it. It weighed on me so much, but what are you gonna do? This wasn't anything serious. I could still eat. I had a roof over my head. Who was I to complain? So when I played this game, and the whole message of it was, it's okay to feel bad about things. Don't bury that stuff down. Don't try and act like everything is okay when it's not. That was the exact thing I needed to hear at that time. I just needed to hear someone say, it's okay to feel bad. And that's why no matter what other positives I can say about the other games, no matter what improvements the later games might make to the gameplay, Persona 4 will always be my favorite in the series because it was the game I played when I needed it. Honestly, I haven't felt this way about a piece of media since I was a teenager and I watched Evangelion for the first time. Because when I was a teenager, I was stressed. I was overwhelmed. I felt like the whole world was weighing on me and everyone had all these expectations of me that I couldn't possibly deal with. And I think most teenagers feel that way. And when I saw other teenagers in shows or movies or games, they would deal with problems, but everything always worked out okay. But then I watched this anime about a teenager who was being forced to save the world, and it essentially caused him to mentally crumble to dust from the constant pressure being placed on him. And I just found it such a relief to see some character I could point at and go, there, see, I'm not the only one. And seeing him still manage to go out there and do his job, it helped me keep going when I was a kid. I know some people have heard me going on about all the heavy issues that come up in this game, and you're probably wondering how I could possibly talk about it all like it's a good thing. This just sounds like something that would crush your spirits. Well, it's because I actually think that some people out there need stories like this. For some people, the way they work through the stress of the world is just to see someone else out there going through a depressing situation and admitting to themselves, dude, there's no fix for this. Sometimes life just sucks and I have to work through it. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to get through this. And I think that's the big reason why so many people love the Persona series. As I said, the gameplay is incredible. They've created this amazing loop of building up stats and connections and dungeon crawling and demon Pokemon collecting. And they've perfected the turn-based combat at a time when other RPGs had given up on. But these games have had so many incredible characters, and exploring all their personal issues is part of the game. It's literally a power-up mechanic. And because of that, I think that if you play enough of these games, you're bound to find some characters that you're going to connect with. Maybe it's the teacher who is overwhelmed because she can't keep surviving on how much she works. Maybe it's the politician who ruined his career because of a mistake he made decades ago. Maybe it's the old couple still trying to get over the death of their child. Whoever it is, and no matter where you are in your life or what you're going through, I think that there will be at least one character within this franchise that will be the exact character that you need at that point in your life. Okay, that's probably the most serious I have ever gotten with a video on this channel. I really laid my heart out there, didn't I? But what can I say? That's the power of Persona. But I don't want to make it seem like these games are just super gloomy. No, there's a lot of fun, upbeat moments. Watching these characters come together and bond can be so uplifting, and heck, I'll even admit, I think the games even have some pretty good jokes in there. Okay, sometimes there are some really problematic jokes as well. Again, these games aren't perfect, but despite how dark I made this sound, there's actually a bright, shining light inside of them. And it's because of that darkness that light is so important. As I said, I think it's encouraging to see characters suffering through very real problems, but still managing to keep going. And that's kind of what the social link system is all about. As I said, you raise your social link just by being there with these characters and helping them during their moments of crisis. And that's really the message of all this. Yes, these characters are dealing with heavy issues, and the way you help them with it is just by being there. I made a joke earlier about how many RPGs come down to the power of friendship lets us kill this demon. But that's kind of what Persona is. It's a series about how the power of friendship lets you slay demons. Except these demons are metaphorical. They're the things that you can't exactly punch. But by just being there for people, by letting them know that they're not alone, it can help them to see that there is beauty to life, that there is fun, that there is joy to be had even surrounded by all these problems. And that joy, that's the glue that holds this series together. As heavy as these games are, as dark as the plots can become, whenever the ending credits roll, all I can think about is the good times I spent, and I can't help but smile. It's kind of like life. You work through the dark times, you work through the problems, and even when there's no answer to those problems, you can still find joy in this life. And that's a pretty special message. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. This was something very different for us. I've never really done a big deep dive analytical essay on something that I love, but again, this is the 25th anniversary of the series and I want to do something special for it. But if you want to see me do more videos like this, if you want to hear me do another big deep dive into a game just so I can talk about how much I love it, let me know. There's certainly a ton of other games that I would love to just dive back into. So if you want to see more videos like this, then let me know down in the comments, or you can of course reach out to me on Twitter at Thorgy's Arcade. And if you want more stuff from us, then there should be a couple of other Persona videos that we did this month popping up right now, so you can check those out. And if you enjoy these videos, then please share them around the web. Seriously, you guys would not believe how many views we get just from you guys sharing these videos. It really does help. And of course, remember to do all the usual YouTube stuff. Leave us a comment, give us a thumbs up, click that subscribe button, ring that bell. There's so many things they want you to do on YouTube. Anyway, thank you guys again. Stay safe out there, and come back next time.